Now, this is probably going to disturb some of you because it immediately brings up this picture of conflict between science and religion. Science is working on logic, which is mutual exclusion, non contradiction. And we are saying that knowability or, God, for example, in this case, is violating all these principles of logic. Therefore, God is illogical, and because God is illogical, therefore, is contradictory to science. But that's not the argument I'm going to make, because I'm going to say that even if you see a chair or you have a coin, you are already using language in ways that are illogical. And yet, there are some nuances in ordinary language which do not, or partly exist in science, but not very clearly in logic. And these nuances are is a, has a types of things. The real problem is that you have an opposite like head and tail, and you say that something is neither head nor tail. That's like saying there's a cube which has a left and right, but the cube is not left or right. So that, or a chair which has a backrest, a seat, and legs, but the chair is actually not the back seat, not the legs, not the handrest, not the legs. So the natural question is, what is this chair? Where does it exist? It's not, because it's not the handrest, so it's not in the hand, because it's not the back rest, therefore it's not in the backrest, it's not the seat, it's not the leg, so it's not in any part of the chair. So there's a chair, but it's not in any part of the chair. Then where is it? And the answer is that reality has many levels. And the transcendent aspect is a higher level, and the immanent aspect is the same, it exists at the same level. So in some sense, you can say that chairness is in all parts of the chair. Because if they were not parts of the chair, then you wouldn't say this is this is the leg of the chair. You would rather it's a plank of wood, and everything would become a plank of wood or a piece of wood if there wasn't a chair. But if there is a chair, then you can say this is a seat, this is a backrest, this is a leg, this is a handrest, and so on. So the mere aggregation of these pieces into the form of a chair actually changes all the parts. And that's why you say that, there is a descriptive difference. You describe the world in different words if they are part of a chair versus if they are not. So in that sense, chairness is immanent in all the parts, and yet the chair is not any of these parts. So even this world, or at least you can say the way we describe the world through ordinary language, through ordinary concepts, is illogical. The problem is not a contradiction between a religious language and a scientific language. The contradiction is between ordinary language and the scientific language. Because in ordinary language, you are able to speak about the coin, which is both head and tail and neither head and tail, which has all these parts of the chair, but the chair is not any of these parts. And these things exist in ordinary language, but they do not exist, at least not very overtly, in modern science. And this creates the sense or the problem of the contradiction between religious language and a scientific language, which essentially is a problem of logic, because we are trying to break the principles of logic by saying this world is duality, but God is non-dual. Now, once the problem is posed as the contradiction between ordinary language and scientific language, then we can liberate this discussion, or we can change the at least context of this discussion from a debate between science and religion and move the conversation to how do I perceive the world in terms of ordinary concepts, which is completely different from how do I speak of this world in a scientific language. And the essence of this problem is that science doesn't speak of the world at all in terms of concepts. For example, there is nothing called hot and cold, there is only temperature. It is not big and small, it has some length in terms of meters or feet. It is not long and short, it is not near and far, it is not close by or immediate or further. And because everything is reduced to the measurement of a single standard, and space itself, because of these measuring standards, space itself gets defined in a completely new way. And here's an illustration of that. When you speak in terms of opposites like hot and cold, there are two extremes to this space, if you call this so-called space. The left side may be hot and the right side may be cold, and these are the extremes of the space. But if you speak in terms of length or a scale, that space has no limit, right? You can go on repeating meter after meter after meter. It's infinite to the left, infinite to the right. So whenever we start speaking in terms of concepts, our space is closed because there are two extremes of this space. One extreme is hot, other is cold, one is sweet, the bitter. And all these opposites essentially bound your language. They bound the description in terms of these extremes. But when you have physical measuring instruments, then space is unbounded. Now, this conflict between ordinary language and scientific language begins with these different ideas about space. One which has extremes and bounds, the other one which is unbounded or open. And because science employs all its properties in terms of these measuring instruments, which are unbounded dimensions, whereas in ordinary language we have everything that's bound by concepts. Therefore, a fundamental contradiction is created between these two languages.